Hello and welcome to OGD VODCAST number 7. I'm Martin Thibeault and this is Pat Zalewski. We're sitting here in Pat's home in Cairns, Australia, and it's November 2022. This one's going to be a bit different. It's still part of the Pat Zalewski Series, but it's more about your succession and what leads to it. So for that one, I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to share a little bit of my own background, how I came to the GD and how I came to meet you, Pat. For me, it started in 1995 when a friend of mine in Quebec City, in Canada, actually had purchased your Cabal of the Golden Dawn book. He had bought that alongside with Ritual Magic by Donald Tyson. Neither one of us knew anything about magic or occultism, but one thing for sure is when I saw that book of yours, it was so beyond my level of understanding anything. I didn't even know how I would begin to grasp something like that, but I knew I was intrigued and I knew there was something there. What followed shortly after that is that friend of mine and myself, we ended up moving in an apartment. We started practicing magic on our own, and I was on a quest to try and see if I could find a Golden Dawn order. I didn't even know if the order still existed today. I ended up finding a GD order in Western Canada, in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I decided to pack up all my stuff, load it up on top of the car and drive across the country to join the temple there. I had found the website for them and had contacted them. This was in '96. I drove across the country and ended up joining that particular order in September 1996. I was initiated a neophyte. Fast forward, my involvement with this order was pretty intense. I ended up moving into one of the temple locations. I lived in there for 3 years. We were doing GD 120 hours a week, 7 days a week. We had classes and initiations and different things. One thing that I started to notice probably around '99 is as I was reading more and more of your material and seeing some of the diagrams and things such as the stuff for the 4-7, I quickly realized that our order that was built based on Regardie's Golden Dawn book, and obviously the head of that order was self-initiated, we were missing a bunch of the diagrams, a bunch of the God forms, a bunch of the content that you publish in your stuff. I started to actually bring it up in the order, see if we could implement it, if we could integrate it, and I was met with a lot of resistance when it came to that. So that wasn't really possible to apply an order wide. At least we ended up doing it a little bit of in our own temple in Vancouver. But anyways, long story short, it didn't work out with this order. By 2000, I had been initiated into the 5-6, I think in '99 or 2000, and shortly after that. There was a lot of conflicts and different things that led to me leaving this order, which quite frankly was a good thing because it was run like a cult. I'm not going to name names or anything, but it was sectarian, it was dogmatic, and the level of control and oppression in there was just unbelievable, and it was a relief to leave. My whole intention the whole time that I was in the order was to eventually start a temple for that order. So I actually left Vancouver, went back to Montreal, Quebec, and ended up opening Horus Temple on my own. Now the problem I had is that I was a young 5-6 with no one to initiate me, no one to teach me, no one to mentor me, and I got a bit scared of that, to be honest, because I was thinking if I'm just running a group on my own with no checks and balances, no one to teach me and no one to initiate me further, how bad can my ego get, you know? So I started to really look around what would be possible for me in terms of finding a teacher, finding a mentor, someone who could guide me. That's when I got in touch with you. All through all those years, of course, I had been reading your books, looking up to you and wondering why we weren't implementing all that stuff into our order.
That's not what you were just one of many at that point. I've got a whole box in the bedroom there of people wanting to do GD, and I said no. I said this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You can only work if the person's had training beforehand, and what you do is if the training is at a particular level, you can then bring them up to get the rhythm or the passage or the energy flow to match what you want to do. That's part of it. To start from scratch is very, very difficult, almost impossible, I think, in some cases.
Yeah, and even then, you still didn't want me as a student. You rejected me initially and said, "Look, what I'll do, I'll answer your questions. Just send me a question when you have one in an email, and I'll send you some answers." And so I agreed to that. Obviously, I didn't have much of a choice, but I started to load up. I remember dozens of questions in my emails. So I had so many, and I just bombarded you with email after email after email. So I guess this is the part where I want to bring you in is what made you change your mind? I mean, I was bombarding you with questions.
Well, it was very simple. I did some divination to see if it would work or not. I didn't do it beforehand because I didn't want to do it. It was that simple. But you got to the point where you drive me bloody nuts, and I had a choice of either cutting off ties completely or going along with the flow. So I did some divination on it. Said go along with the flow. And what we did was I sent over a student of mine to be with you for 6 to 8 months, maybe a bit longer, to get you up to speed for the rhythm, the pattern, and maybe some additional aspects that are not in Regardie's book. Like Regardie got the consecration of the Celestes and the Douche very, very wrong, saying the quarter hours of a clock, they're really the half hours, things like that. So I want to get it right. Not that Regardie was wrong on everything, but the books were the rituals that he published were badly chopped up. And
this was a few years later, though.
Yeah,
but by the time you had sent him out, I mean, before that, you did actually assign him to me as to start taking me through this.
Well, at that stage, I was busy doing other things, and I said, okay, see how it works out.
Yeah.
I said to my offside at the time, see how it works out, and just keep in touch and update him on everything. And then my offside would come with questions, and he'd bring questions to me and say, shit, look at this. God, I'll be here for a month of Sundays trying to answer these things. So, but that's how it worked. And when you made the offer to send somebody, come over myself or send somebody over, I sent somebody over to update you. You already had your existing temple there.
Yeah, and you had given me a THAM by then already.
Yeah, and we worked at it because part of what the training that we were doing was that I didn't throw away your 5th, 6th grade. That's silly. You go through, just because you're in a different order, still a Golden Dawn, but in a different side branch, and you're doing essentially all the same things, essentially. Why would you not? And in the outer order, to my way of thinking, there's very little that changes. You can. I taught basically in the outer order. I didn't go in for a mad thing. I taught pretty much the knowledge lectures and what the GD did. I didn't go much further than that. But the real problem was when you got to the inner and you had to layer back and go over what you've done. But we'll get to that later. But so I was in a situation where you're doing the work. You had done the 5, 6. We went through all the stuff to make sure you're up to date, and we held the ZAM, and then we went to the THAM level, and that's when you wanted someone to come out and show you some more. That's when my offsider went over there and worked with you.
Yeah.
So that was that.
Yeah, and that was great. We obviously got to spend time together, going over stuff, doing a lot of ritual work, and you got to see a lot of how the temple was operating, and we kept the progression going, of course, into the Practicus, Adeptus Minor, and Philosophus. And shortly after that, I suppose, is when I really started to see you expand, develop, and really take your correspondence course to another level. I was there to accompany, or I don't know, be a guinea pig for it, I suppose,
Well, I had the knowledge, or some knowledge, one would say, and I had to structure it, put it into some sort of a structuralist format. It's right, me sitting there and pulling things out of the air, say, yeah, that relates to that, and do that, but how does anyone else learn from that if you don't have a progressionary element of learning? And so what I did was I like to structuralise things, and so I did. And that was more easier for all of us, to be quite honest. And that way you wouldn't look at the 3-8 one day and the 2-9 the next, the 1-10, then go back to the 4-7. You're all over the place like a dog's breakfast. That doesn't help anyone. You have to see where you've been and where you're going. And the subgrades do that for you. That's what the Kabbalah does as a whole. You know where you've been, you know where you've got to go. The next level up, you've got a rough idea of what you have to do to go to that next particular level, and that was it. But it all comes down to how good you are and what you've learned and how you put in the practice. But I'll just digress a little bit. When I came over to Canada, I think it was about 2006, I was there for a couple of weeks, and I looked at all your rituals, and they were very, very good. I couldn't. The energetics, the training, the tuition that you had started was good. I'm not kissing your ass or anything. I thought it was wrong. I'd tell you straight. But this is the guy I am.
Yep.
I call a spade a shovel. But I think it was very, very good. And I thought, well, okay, this is going like clockwork. I couldn't ask for anything better. Your rituals match anything I think they probably do anywhere else. And this comes to another element too. A lot of people have gone into temples, they've learned things, and they've gone out of temples and they get fired, expelled, or leave, whatever the case may be. But if they're doing the rituals properly and have the dedication for them, the things will happen and things will grow for them. And with you on the scene, I had to put a lecture for the higher grades rather than just combine as a whole unit, because that's what I had been doing during those period of 20 odd years, 25 years or more, 26. I had it all in my head, and I just had to write the thing down and make it easier for people to access, and also critique. If I stuff it up, which I do sometimes, and do something wrong, I want to know. I want to fix it. I don't give a damn about whose fault it is. The idea is to fix something. That's my element as far as the GD goes. Or there's this, when someone will say, oh, so-and-so didn't do this and so-and-so didn't do that, well, that's irrelevant. All right, that's great. That's your background. How do you fix the bloody thing? That's my attitude for it. And that's the way I would work with it. So when you actually forced my move, because you were, you made me, you had an existing temple which was expanding, and you had to have all the basics from 101 to high as you could go to look at all the small nuances in it. I had the answers for many of it, there's some I didn't, but that was the idea, was to put it behind and learn from it, expand and extrapolate. And the correspondence course was really quite good, but when I went over to Canada, Montreal, the idea was also to show people what was in it. One of the things we did in Montreal that was really a bit of an interesting thing from Golden Dawn viewpoints is that I had everyone come on in the neophyte ceremony. We did a neophyte ceremony, a mock-up of it.
Yep.
And I had them wear little
cardboard
things in a certain colour, because there were essentially three colours: black, yellow and red, and they were your colours of neutral, positive and passive. And what I wanted to do was people, when they saw the Naut, was to see how different elements came together, passive, neutral and so forth and so on, and how one element supported the other. So by wearing that, people could see how that worked, which is, we all knew it at Whare Ra, they all knew it at Whare Ra and told me, but I wanted to show you guys, and the only way to do that was to have a ritual and have it on. And you could do that for all the rituals. Now, who was active, who was passive, who was neutral, there's always been a debatable point, but it came down to functionality to a certain extent.
Well, people spoke about those exercises for years after and still do today. It was a phenomenal experience. I mean, that, along with everything leading up to 2006 when you came, and by the way, that's when you came in at 6'5".
That's right, yeah.
In
well, that's one of the reasons I came over. It was great. I wasn't going to do it on paper. And then you came out here later for the 7th floor.
And the transmission of the etheric link, yeah.
Yeah. And then we worked out the A3 and higher.
Maybe the abyss. A3.
Yeah, we'd already had that done in a structural capacity, and so we worked it on that basis. And you're the one I was teaching. I wasn't teaching everyone that. You're the one who saw the hotspots that I had into a structuralized system and added. And when it became structuralized, I had to increase certain constructs and made them more accessible and made them more palatable to understand. So that was a good thing that I did that, because I had to go over and fix it. So I could be sitting back in my lunchbox thinking, oh yeah, this is great, and then talk to somebody else about it and they have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. So I had to have that transition or elevation where you just work up to a certain point.
See, for me, it was very, very clear. When I left that previous order that I was in, it was very clear that it is you that I wanted as a teacher. You're the first one that I discovered the GD through with your book, and everything that I was reading and that you were doing, even online, I knew I had to be your student. And when it happened that you decided to take me on, I even told you, I don't know if you remember this, I told you at that point in time, I realized I'm probably going to have to unlearn a bunch of stuff, and I want you to know that I'm prepared to do it. I'm going to, whatever it's going to take, I can deconstruct whatever I've learned, because I realize that what I've been trained in is some of it will be, it won't line up with the oral tradition and the kind of experience that you bring, the caliber that you bring.
This was always a big problem. People read the books, take it literally, put their own interpretation on it without even knowing, and they'll find they're chasing their own tail half the time. I'm not saying it's impossible. I think that you have to understand. When I when I went up and saw Jack, I'd been running a temple up to say 5, 6 level, and I'd read Regardie's papers back to front. Regardie was great because he gave an overview of the system, and in that sense you could picture where you had to go. But I had to go through a whole lot of different stuff. When I went through the darn rituals, I had to go through and understand the rhythm, the pattern, why they did it, who stopped where, who stood there. So there was the mechanics of the ritual, and then there was the understanding of the general movements of the ritual. So what they did was they gave me the bare basics, and they said, well, you've got to dig deep and go further. That's exactly what I did. So I just followed the traditional Whare Ra method of doing it. But the difference was that I structuralised it, but they didn't always do that. They would go on individual and go into their particular area. The individual wouldn't sit down there for hours and hours like I would studying. They would do their work, but a lot of them would not do it. And the amount of time I put into it, I'd go into bed at 1 o'clock in the morning and getting up at 5:30. I'm doing a lot of GD work in the meantime, in the middle of it. So a lot of people wouldn't do that. And you're doing exactly the same thing as what I do. So,
and I have to, maybe that's my own testimonial or whatever, but the contrast of what I experienced from even though those 4 years in that prior order were really intense and living there, and of course I'll always value the people that I met and the experiences I had and the foundation it gave me. Still, it was night and day from what I experienced when I started learning under you, and I did have to unlearn and deconstruct stuff, but it's what you bring to the table is just light years ahead of.
But that's the way I was taught. And now when Jack showed me things, I made my adjustments to my own rituals, and I'm doing the same to you. You already had the experience, you just had to readjust it. You don't go back to square one, that's silly.
No.
I think that's madness. That means you throw away everything you've ever learned and try and do it again. That's too black and whitish for me. I think you've got to be flexible enough to see that. But on the other hand, you've got to test people too. And you guys come up there. When I saw what you were doing, I thought, well, I don't need to show them much. The student I had over there, he showed you the rhythm, the patterns, the readjustment of certain parts of alignment within the ritual, and the focus that you put to it was good. Now, the reason we're doing all this about talking about Martin to an extent is to show that Martin understood the system from day one when he was putting it together in a structuralised format, as no one else has really done. I've taught other people in high ranks, but they accepted only up to a certain point. They wouldn't accept the higher teachings because it really goes beyond what they're used to. So that's one of the reasons why we created grade levels. We went up, because I was 7-4 under Jack, and I realised that we're getting top heavy. There was all this information, and what do you do? And under the old Golden Dawn system, it was one tree, and you only got up to the top of Yetzirah. You wouldn't go into Bria and sup with archangels and go up to the top and meet Metatron and Sandalphon. That wasn't the way the Golden Dawn system really worked. Falcon knew this, and that's why he put the grades up. The system really was in one single tree of a seer, and you had the different variations of the tree. And so that way, that's one of the reasons Falcon could go up. But other people who came and said, oh, you can't go past that. And my immediate response is that, so you think you're at the top of Yetzirah, dude?
But even the microcosm man paper it explains a whole construct in the whole tree in Asiya and perfectly lines up with what we're doing in the what Falcon did in the S7 and what we're doing.
Yeah, he did that. Falcon opened it up to 9-2, and he was 9-2. I think his wife was 9-2. His daughter at the beginning, I think they're all 9-2 at one particular point. I'm not sure on that. Tony Pullican is more into that than I am. And even in Bristol, they were one of the Mackenzie sisters was 9-2 as well. So they went up to that particular level, and they never hit the top because, I don't know, maybe thinking that 10-1 was totally negative. The reality was that 10-1's another grade like anything else. But I'd spoken to Temple Chiefs, and Bethany Jones is one. I'd spoken to Daddleston, but I didn't talk to him about that. But I asked Bethany Jones, and she told me point blank, these are Temple grades. She said, they're not meeting with masters, they're Temple grades, and they should be treated like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if the 9-2 is a Temple grade and so is a 10-1, people just haven't got there yet, in a sense. This is where they put their own spin on things. I think if you get to 10-1, you've mastered the system for yourself, as much as you can, within a limit. Doesn't mean you know everything there is to know. No one will ever know that. But you've got to a point where you can teach it all the way up, someone else what you know. Under the old theory, someone who's baby the abyss couldn't teach, would be able to try and teach a 7-4 what he knew or what she knew. And they wouldn't go much beyond that point because there was nothing to pass on. I didn't want it that way. I thought, okay, some of these high grades, it was very abstract, and they didn't learn that much. There were papers put out at Whare Ra about them, and Tony Phil's got a couple of those, but they were very abstract. It's very to try and nut it out what they actually did. I didn't want that. I wanted a full system. I wanted if you want to get to the very high levels, the 8-3 was looking after 5th, 6th grade. Not the 8-3, the baby the abyss.
Looking at upper 6-5.
Yeah, and the 8-3 was looking after the 6-5, and the 9-2 was looking after the 7-4, and the top of 10-1 they were just looking after that. So it was just one grade higher would look after the other grade. So that was the focus point. That was just your ritual was your focus point for these higher levels in part. But you had to open the door for individual interpretation. So what I did was I went through the ritual myself. I claimed 9-2. Who else is going to give me a 9-2?
Nope.
And so we did that. I did what Falcon did. I just copied what he did. Okay, we've got to start somewhere. We've got to have a hierarchy. And the difference was that I put my money where my mouth was. I backed it up with papers and directions to go to those particular levels, those higher levels. That's the distinction. Where at Whare Ra they might have got an introduction, maybe a little bit of help with somebody to focus in an area, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I didn't want that. I wanted to be more understood of how these things worked. And that was the best way to do it. Then once you do your basic research, then your basic research on the core principle that's been outlined, you have the additional stuff that you want to go in and specialise in. That's what that's all about. You start to specialise about 7-4 more than anything else.
Well, so speaking of 7-4, I mean, that's what Mathers, Westcott, and Woodman did, right? They gave themselves a 7-4 and started the order. I mean, obviously there's...
They were starting from the beginning, and they had no choice, and we're seeing, all we've really seen is the THAM papers. We know some of these papers exist through Tony, who has knowledge in all these sort of areas that I don't possess and access. But we don't have any information. But I think the Stella Matutina one, because the Stella Matutina one is very similar to Japanese karate ranks. They all got to 9th dan and said, no, the 10th dan is too perfect, no one will do that. A friend of mine went over and that's what they told them, karate masters were on for an hour. 10 years later, they're all claiming 10th dan.
Well, like I told you, in ninjutsu, there's 15 dans now.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't know about that. I'm a decade person. You know, I start to work on a 10-stage system. But the idea is when you get into the 10th, you don't know everything when you get to the 10th. It's just that you know the system that you've employed. That is a distinction. You know what you know, and you employ it. There's going to be things you do not know, and because you've worked the system out and you've put your own rules in and you understand it. And when you finalise that, you finalise the whole framework, which you do at 10-1. Then you go back at the 10-1 level and refill it. So you take levels of the higher levels, look at the lower levels and explain it. The 10-1 is really explaining the second order, not the 10-1 particularly, but the higher levels is explaining the other orders. So really you're in a very, very interesting situation there, where you can develop on your own, but you've also got the framework that you've come through, and you keep that sacred, if you want to use that particular term.
So you received the 7.4 and the transmission of the etheric link from Jack Taylor.
Yeah.
But essentially, Babe of the Abyss, 8 equals 3, 9 equals 2, and 10 equals 1. You've basically brought yourself through these gradual.
Yeah, I didn't do it all, yes, I didn't do it all at once. I did over a period of time. When I saw I was ready for it. I didn't even want to take the 8.3, the Babe of the Abyss, when I first came over here 22 years ago, because I hadn't had the framework underneath me structuralised enough for me to accept it. But when I started doing the correspondence course, which I pulled out of my head towards the mostly, and I did all of that, I got to a point where I said, okay, I'm ready to do the next lot. But there are going to be people that scream about this, saying you can't and all this sort of thing, but you can.
Well, and what happens when, say, for example, I'm hitting, knocking on the door. You gave me my 7.4 and the etheric link in 2008, I think it was, and then I'm knocking on the door to get into Babe of the Abyss. Obviously, to be able to complete this system, you have to be there yourself.
That's right, and you have to study with the person. With this day and age of instant communication, it's like going to someone's home and they sit down and talk to you about what you are at a certain level and how you can elevate it through. Not everything is on the temple floor for these higher levels. You have to sit down, figure out what they're doing, discuss it. It's not how well they can do certain things, it's what they've accomplished and what their transition is and where do they see themselves and how they're going to do it. And you can do most of that online. Really you can. The actual initiation, no, you can't, but the other stuff you can, because you have to experience a ritual. And so that made it a hell of a lot easier. If this was 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you'd be going to someone's house, you'd open the door, you'd sit down, and they'd talk to you pretty much as I'm talking to you now through the computer, and just that. The difference is you probably can't ask all the questions, but you're getting a whole lot given to you for you to mull over. And some adepts would have just given them the basis, they wouldn't even answer questions when they talk in these higher levels. So there's a real mixture here, but the higher levels are there. In the system I'm using, I don't want it to stop at 9.2, I want it to be complete. And because we've done the 10.1, to us that's satisfactory. That means a sire has been touched, we've completed the outer level of a sire. But now we have to be at 10.1, have to go back and figure out what we've got wrong, what we need to improve on, which I do constantly all the time. I don't sit on my ass and just say, I'm 10.1, to hell for anything else. I get back here and I keep working the system to make sure that I get it right and in that particular level. But some people have taken the 10.1 in other orders, but I don't have a problem with that. If they know the system, but doing the 10.1 doesn't means that you know the Zalewski orientation of it. But if you went to another order, they may not have the higher levels that I have. They may only go to 9.2 or something. Well, that's no mean feat. It's no less a mean feat in itself. But it's there with their focus and direction. So that they're working their system, I'm working mine. We're still doing exactly that. We're still going over the old rituals. So when you see, this is a big thing. You just don't get. This is where the problems occur. When people get to past 5, 6, or what, they don't. A lot of them didn't know where to go. They didn't know what to take on. They took on Crowleyana. They took on all sorts of things. Tantra. Some of them was Grant took on Tantra. That was his expression. Crowley's secretary, which he did a pretty good job of it too. But they take these additional and did try and slot them in, but I didn't. I wanted everything to come in, to have a taint, and the reason for that, the GD said he could go back and relate it to something he'd done previously. That was the focus point for me. So everything you did had to go back and study the order that you'd previously gone through. So there was really no points in separation. One example of this is a Cromley Temple. Now what happened was, this is from my perspective, Tony Fuller can come in and correct me on this, because Tony knows far more than I do on this subject, is that they were running out of papers and Brodie Ennis brought in a whole lot of Cromley Temple papers for the 7.4. Mm-hmm. You'll see an example of this in Francis King's book, Ritual Magic in England, where he gave the 7.4 and the sexual teachings of the 7.4. And he brought all these papers in from another order. Now, he was right in picking the auric papers, which were very, very good. And they did, in many ways, relate to the GD. It got to the point where people were saying that that the GD is a sort of an outer expression of the Chromtic Temple, because they do the ritual that in a certain way, and the Chromtic Temple did not. They have their own rituals, but it's very, very different. So it's a good argument for many AO papers that you're going to find are going to be Chromtic Temple papers, because that's what Brodie Innes did. So he filled up the order of the 7/4 with a lot of Chromtic Temple papers. And I don't do that. I don't bring in Chromtic Temple papers or anything like that. They're very good at what they do. I don't have access to them all for a start. I did remember looking at the headings of them, and I thought these are very good. And Brodie Innes was supposed to look at energetics of what happened in the aura when you're doing this. Well, my journey was not reading Chromtic Temple papers. My journey was to study radionics. If you don't know what it is, look it up. And I got hold of that, and I was studying energetics from that perspective. So while some people were reading about the auras, I was doing ritual work, or not ritual work, dowsing and so forth, and in radionics to study that, which worked on the subtle bodies and chakras, and you could actually measure it, which you can't, I don't think you can do it in Chromtic Temple papers, I'm not sure of that, but you can measure out the level of issues or problems you've got by miasms or glitches in your system, and you try and get rid of them. So it's mainly a health thing. But what it does is it frees all the things getting in the way of you, so that you can go ahead and get rid of obstructions in the auric body and things like that. So radionics does all that. So that was my journey. Now, someone from the Chromtic Temple would look at the aura and they'd see it from a different viewpoint. Other people like Jack would come in and they would look at it from, they would use colour healing. So there's all different journeys you go. You're still doing essentially the same thing for these higher particular levels.
The downside, though, of absorbing papers from another system is that other system has its own initiations, its own symbols, its own build-up of a universe of symbols, right? And if you're pulling the papers out of there to really understand the full context of the papers, you'll probably want to, or maybe even need to, experience the initiations in that other system. And I think that's the downside of absorbing something external into, unless you completely detached it and make it
you bring up an argument that's been brought out many times. I've actually said this many times. I've said this about tablets, for example. I knew tablet theory long before I got into Golden Dawn, and what the Golden Dawn teaches is a wash-down variation of it. And what Prasad gives, it's like skips over a water line. It's a very complex scene. So when he brought tablets into it, he decided the Golden Dawn changed it around and made it become more practical. And that is good, but if he left it the way they were, just an Indian philosophy without making a change, it would be little benefit to you. Now you can actually do things with it that the other orders that people in India would never ever do, or in the Theosophical Society.
Because what you're doing with the upper levels, or what we're doing with the third order and so on and so forth, is you're continuing to build on the actual, to expand on the actual G structure, not taking a completely different system and then just kind of throwing it into it. Obviously, like the aura papers, if they get fully absorbed into it, that's a whole other thing where you don't have to refer back to the original system, but there's bits extracted out of it.
See the point, when Brodie Innes brought in the auric papers, I think he brought them in for 6.5 and 7.4. I have no idea what he did on the subgrades. I've got my suspicions, but I don't know. The auric papers were very good, but they were very baseline. The people I knew, you see, the Sun Order, as it was called in New Zealand, when brought it in about 1964, I think it was, or 63, I can't remember which. Many of the people in the OTR were members of the Sun Order. So Barbara Nan, Charlie Nan, Jack was a member of the Sun Order. I asked Jack about it, and he said, we decided to give him a hand, He didn't think much of the rituals. He liked the teaching, but he didn't think much of the rituals. He found they lacked power, but that was just his opinion. Probably something lacks power generally, and if it's a solid system, it's generally the person who does it. But anyway, so I think these people that I knew all had training in the auric papers and things like that. They'd worked the system, so they understood the aura as I did. And when we started talking about the aura and subtle bodies, they also had the Alice Bailey aspect. So Alice Bailey came into it, but Alice Bailey's teachings had a certain taint to it that you had to get rid of and just concentrate on the basic. Trying to read that stuff, man, it's like trying to read Double Dutch or Sanskrit. But I persevered with it. All the Alice Bailey teachings were
You got to read out like 9 pages out of 10 to really get the.
Yeah, that's right. But I did that. The person who I owe it to, there was a particular author who wrote books on radionics, David Tansley, and David Tansley summarised, and he got down and he distilled Bailey's teaching and put him into radionics. And we had a radionics machine at our place, one of Tansley's rooms, incidentally, and I used to practice on that. I did a couple of radionics readings here and there, and I used to practice all the time. I'd check myself out, someone else out, I'd get a hair sample and work over it. And that was part of your training, I thought. So my journey was not always standard strict GD, but I could bring aspects of that into the GD with radionics, training on the tappers and things like that, and made up what I did. And I always say to people that this correspondence course is my journey. If the lectures that I give you are not up to your level of knowledge, change it, make it better. But make sure it is better, not equal to, not lesser than, but better. That's how I work the system, and I still maintain that to this day. So I know a lot of my stuff's going to be changed over the years. I don't have a problem with that. As people develop and their mindsets develop, they'll go into making changes to suit what they actually do, and that's important. And that's where you bring in an element of the inner self of the individual coming in there. So the indeterminacy aspect. So you've got to do that. You can't be black and white, 1, 2, 3 like that. You have to have that indeterminacy quality because you're co-creator of everything, and you have to understand that because it's your system that you're working. Now, I took my entire system, say 10-1, and I put it beside Chick's, or I put it beside someone else's who's doing a full system. There'd definitely be different changes in there. That doesn't make I'm better or they're better. It just simply makes we've gone in slightly different directions as such. So that's the way I look at it. But at least we have a full system developed and we're working on improving it, making it better. And we're still improving it. I'm at it every week. So if you go onto our Universal Mysteries, you'll see I'm bringing a whole lot of elements into it. I'm bringing in semiology into it. I'm bringing in a whole bunch of other stuff that are very, very necessary, I think, in understanding the GD system. Under the GD system, you can't just look at psychology anymore and just say, right, do it the Rigardi way. What you've got to do is understand it from totally different levels. And semiology is a really, really good approach as a start point. It doesn't mean to say it's got the whole framework, the golden egg within it, but it's a great start point. Then you've got the alchemical aspect as well, which you had trouble with because I was
initially,
I looked at it from a totally different perception. I took Garson's viewpoint. Garson's viewpoint, he looked at it from spiritual alchemy. But Garson had a problem. Very eloquent writer, but when you just put together a series of quotes and you don't give an end result or a directional focus, it doesn't have as much value. I've seen his work not on his individual books, but the one he did on John Dee, which I thought was quite good. It showed an incredible amount of knowledge in alchemy, and that's the way I leaned in going into that. So if someone came in, say a 7-4 from another order into our order, they would have some issues because we with the subgrades, we've got the varying subgrades. All of those relate back going over the rituals and they'd have to relearn a hell of a lot. But that doesn't mean to say what they've learned was not valuable. It is. But if you're looking for a system that I'm learning, you have to make that adjustment. So those are the big aspects of it. And I'm going to put more into the order as such. All you have to do is go back and look at what I've written in the Universal Mysteries on the user search button. You'll see a whole bunch of stuff. And then in the Yahoo stuff beforehand. And also I changed my mind too. I might write something 30 years ago and then have a change of heart, change of direction when I realised I've stuffed it up or I disagree with what I originally wrote. That comes with experience. There's an old saying is you don't apologise, it makes you give you a sign of weakness. I don't give a shit. Well, if I stuff it up, I'll put my hand up and say, well, that's it. You know, because I'm not worried about what people say or think. I just want to get it right.
Oh, there's a lot of layers too to your teachings. I mean, the difference between, say, what you put in the books, what you put into the group and the forum, what you put into the course, and then what you put even beyond the course, it goes deeper and deeper. There's the posts are fantastic, but they're an outer shell for some.
Yeah, well, I don't put what's in the correspondence course on the net, nor do I publish it. My breakdown of the Splendid Souls, one of the reasons I did the Splendid Souls, because it matched the 22 tarot cards, and also Mathis did a book on it. But I wasn't trying to interpret the text and just give a textual translation. I was looking at deconstructing the imagery and see what that meant. And there was a hell of a lot in it. Stephen Skinner did a book on the Splendid Souls recently, which I got. Stephen I admire for many years, a very, very talented individual, immense capacity for doing things. His work on the Chinese feng shui and things like that, very, very good. And but he used the text to try and interpret the image. I didn't. I looked at the image as an individual component, and the text was something separate. It's always which comes first, the chicken or the egg, the text or the image. I really don't know. I don't think anything else does either. But I found more in the image than I did in the text. In my opinion, I have done alchemy for a while. I'm not great, as people remind me, but I get by. But I find that a lot of the text of Splendid Souls doesn't match the imagery. It just doesn't match it at all. And so what I did was I went back to semiology, and I studied Barth's work, Roland Barth's, and he was deconstructing imagery, commercial imagery, to try and look at the meaning. So I followed in that direction and worked on levels there. And so that helped me to layer the imagery in the things. And also there are a couple other books out on that are very, very good. But I couldn't in the Golden Dawn correspondence course, I've broken all this down to about a page and a half or 2 pages per plate. Mm-hmm. But in the what I've done and what we're doing at the moment, we're redoing the
alchemy and rituals.
And we're redoing that. We've brought it to about twice the size. And I've done my bit on Splendid Souls, not from the perspective of the text, but the perspective of what the imagery means. Because my take on this, whether rightly or wrongly, is that the imagery, when you have an imagery, you go to that before the text. The text will tell you one thing, the imagery will text you another. The imagery combines everything and distills it down. And when you do all that, you find a big distance between text and image. And we use the Harley version of the Splendid Souls, which is the later one. Skinner's book was really quite good. It opened up pages. Raphael Prinkel's work is incredible, his knowledge on that. And there's a couple of others that I wasn't too keen on, but he applied it traditionally, which most people would do. But I didn't. They say the Splendid Souls is a 7-stage system. I said, no, it's a 3, 7 and 12-stage system. The basis behind that is that you have it is a Sefer Yetzirah. In alchemy, in the Sefer Yetzirah, you have your 3 elements, you have your 7 planets and 12 signs. Well, the 3 elements are then extrapolated into the 7 planets, who extrapolate into the 12 signs. So when you're looking at something, this is the problem between 12-stage systems and 7-stage systems. They don't know what to do with them. It's really just one is more condensed than the other. It's that simple. And the 3-stage system is more condensed than the 7, which is more condensed than the 12. So you just flow it through. So I didn't look at it, the Splendid Souls from a 7-stage system. I looked at it from 3, 7 and 12, and it worked for me. And people may differ with what I do. I've been hit over. I got a few emails when I wrote that book about people not quoting it. I had about 2 pages, maybe 3, on Kevin Rice's channeling. There was a noted channeler for Garudis. Garudis is an American who used the name, an Indian name, and a very, very good author who went afoul of a few things in his later life, which I don't think is his fault, and is with us no more. But when I got the critiques of the Alchemy and GD book, there was glowing things about he shouldn't be doing channeled information and so forth and so on. It was only about 3 or 4 pages in the book, or whatever the case is, and the rest of the book wasn't even discussed. So people have got different views on alchemy, and you can't say this is right and this is wrong. It's just the level that they're at. If someone's at the level that they can't understand my work, that's fine. I might be at the level I can't understand somebody else's work. Well, that's fine too. But I tried to make it simple as I possibly can. And the Splendid Souls in teaching alchemy really was one core basis for understanding the higher levels, which we interpreted, and we injected the alchemy side into these higher trees, so that you don't just get an understanding of alchemy, you get an understanding of the aspects behind alchemy, so you can then go and apply it. We broke down the Rosaria, but I didn't just go by what Jung did. I went my own way and looked at imagery and what I'd learned. So that's the way I applied it. There are other people who've done well in Splendid Souls, and I'll be giving my version up fairly soon. But it's really, if you have a look at the THAM book that I put out, which is the Inner Teachings book, which has come out recently, which Nick Farrell put together for me, you'll find at the back of it where I do the 3, 7 and 12 stage system of alchemy relating to the tarot cards. Well, that's how I work with Splendid Souls, so everything relates back to everything else. And you'll be getting some more information in this book to what I gave in the other book, but I still have information in the book I haven't got into the correspondence course, but I think they will understand where it's coming from. The correspondence course goes a lot deeper into the Splendid Souls than what I've done for other stuff. Questions?
Well, we branched out a lot. The original direction, of course, is the succession and how we came to meet.
Well, everything I've got goes to Martin. Martin and I are sitting on the system I'm using as 10-1s equally. There are people of 9-2 that I've given it out to because they've done the system that I wanted, but they haven't. And the reason they're not 10-1 is they haven't got to the level of understanding as what Martin has. It's that simple. They want to understand it, but don't put it into practice. Because I'm going into areas where people that have been trained. Most people I teach have got their own temples. That's most of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. They have their own temples. And so what they do is they take it and they put it back into the temple. And the problem also is that some of the people that I teach are in temples for other people and they're contemporaries. And all of a sudden, my stuff comes in and the other person says, where'd you get that from? Zalewski. I thought, well, what does he know? You know, I think so. It gets because they're finding out they're studying with me. I've only taught a handful of people. I haven't taught a lot of people. I don't really want to go and teach a bunch of people. My timing is what I love. My time to myself anyway, and do my own work. So I don't want to be hampered down. And I teach people. I used to teach them in a block course, but now I do things separately. Well, it doesn't leave time for teaching many people, and I keep that very, very quiet. The system that I teach compared to Whare Ra is light years. The Whare Ra system is very different to what I teach. I'm using their principles and their kernel, but I'm using that combined with other stuff that I brought in to make the changes, to make the adaptions, and do that. So I'll be doing a lot of stuff that people of Whare Ra had no idea of, all people whom I taught in New Zealand. They wouldn't understand the subgrades and the way I've broken up. They understand the subgrades, but not the way I've added to it since I've been here in New Zealand over the last 22 years. These people are very good. I gave the 7-4 to a couple of people over there who deserved it. But what I'm doing now is I've gone up from that period. I've gone up a couple of notches. And it's a totally different ball game. Totally different. This is really hard work. With me, it's every week you train. I'll study what's happened, and every week I'll go over it with you. So there's no mirror. It's not mirroring anything. It's really just hard work, head down, bum up, and full steam ahead. That's the way I do it. So that way there's no break. Maybe if they go away for a holiday or something, or Christmas. But
I haven't always kept up with you. I mean, as much as look, you're giving me the 10-1. That's a a massive honor and privilege, but I'm light years behind you in when it comes to understanding, everything and the work
The
that you've done.
10-1, like the 9-2, the A3 and the 7-4, has different degrees to it.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the beginning when you get it, you've got the middle part when you work at it, and you've got the end result where you finish with it, beginning, middle and end. If someone comes in at the 7-4 with me, they learn the beginning of it, then they've got to go through the middle stage where they make the adaptations, understanding where they fit, and then they wind up what they've learned and put a nice big bow around it and a big kiss. That's the end result for the that's the end result. So not just getting a 5-6. I saw this at Whare Ra, it drove me nuts. At Whare Ra, this had a ZAM and a 6-5. The difference between ZAMs of one level and ZAMs at the top level, oh man, it was incredible. So sometimes when you say he's a 5-6 or he's a 6-5, you don't get the entire story unless you know at what level of the grades they are. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about introducing subgrades for every level. I think that's ridiculous. But I think you can. I think you can get a gist of which way you're going. And this is a Whare Ra that they used to help each other all the time. And that's one of the reasons that I'm on the forum giving all this free information out to people, because I want to help people. I don't necessarily need them to follow what I do. I'm just saying, all right, that's my interpretation of it. Okay, you got it. If you see it differently, change it and make your own out of it. Or if it's giving you an idea to do something and go in a certain direction, do that. That's why I'm constantly writing every day on the forum. A lot of people don't use the search commodity. If you go into the search engine of the Universal Mystery you find and just type out something like court cards and Oki and stuff, you'll find a whole bunch of forums, posts that go back many, many years, and some of these are quite lengthy. So it's just a matter of, I'm trying to give it back to people. That's what it comes down to. I'm giving back my idea of how I want to do it. And if people can use it, fine. If they reject it, that's okay. I'm not going to force my ideas down someone's throat. It's not the way I play it. But if they do come with me, I want them to understand what I'm doing. And a lot of people will go with me up to a certain point. And then when we get up to the 6-5, they seem to have problems and issues with it. Because they've got to take on alchemy and understand alchemy. A lot of them don't want to do that.
Well, one thing for sure is that having gone through your entire system and been there with you every step of the way, I, for one, will make sure that everything that you've put out, everything you've written, everything you've taught me, will find its expression through the order of the Gondon, the OGD.
I did this, a lot of stuff. What I think will happen is when I go off the perch, as I said, I'm 74. Most people drop off between 74 and 80 generally. It's not me leaving a legacy so much, it's leaving behind information that people can use, and how they apply it is up to them. If they apply it a certain way and say Pat Zalewski did that, that's up to them. If they just take it and just put their own interpretation on it, I've still achieved my purpose. Is to give the information to people. Now a lot of people will say, well, his interpretation is right. Well, they've got that right to say that. It's a freedom of expression. In some countries, not in others. But they've got to know their stuff. I don't go by what someone says in the paper from one particular temple and says, oh, it said that, and you don't do that. Because I went through what I was taught at Whare Ra. A good example of this, here's a good one. Tony brought this out. Tony and I were both taught that the Sentinel, was it the Sentinel? No, the God forms. God forms and things like that was done by the Hierophant, because Tony's teacher Frank Salt, by having many titles, he's also a Hierophant. So was Jack, and both of them had these books they used to go down and create the God forms and so forth like that. Now Tony uncovered a temple document somewhere where people did their own God forms and brought them on, and we both argued against this because we were trained a certain way. But a document says that you can do that. Now, I don't know who wrote that document, I don't know what temple it's in, and I don't know how many people followed it, so there's a whole lot of things. But I'm going by what I was taught and what I was shown, and I was given the reasons why you do not. No one creates a God form. There's only one person who has the energy pattern there, that's the Hierophant, and you follow the energy within that particular temple. If you start putting your own God forms in that, you become co-creator. The God form will change in energy and direction to what you particularly want. And that's going to be a problem because when you're working in juxtaposition with other temple officers, it doesn't always gel. So Tony uncovered this and quite surprised him. He said, well, apparently not. But that doesn't mean just because you've got a paper that says, or someone else covered a God form, it doesn't mean to say that, apart from the Hierophant or created it, it doesn't mean to say that that person's right or everyone did it. That person may have written it as a Hierophant, maybe as a student, or maybe just simply asked somebody. We don't know the qualifications of that area. And I would never bring that sort of teaching. There's going to be people at temples that differ in teaching mechanisms in ESM. That's a given. And just because someone says this doesn't mean to say someone else did it or it was accepted. You've got too many variables in there. The variables that we were both shown was the Hierophant did it and that was it. There was no interference, full stop.
That's how we used to do it in the past order that I was in. That's how we were doing it at the beginning when we started with my temple until I learned that from you, of course. And the difference is night and day.
Yeah, I know. Energetics, it's there. That means that what happens is people, it's a more stringent but faster flow rate. The energy comes through. Well, that's just one example of different temples having different viewpoints and looking at documentation. It's not the documentation, just because someone wrote it, doesn't mean to say it's true, doesn't mean to say everyone did it, it doesn't mean to say it has any authority. It could be someone's worksheet, or it could be someone who had it and put it out for a short time and it was withdrawn. You do not know so many of these factors. Mm-hmm. So when people start quoting documentation to me, you have to go through this. You say, who wrote it? When was it done? Did they follow it through? Was it? And the answer to these questions is many of them you just simply don't know, because there is doubt there. But when both Tony and I went through, we were told distinctly at Whare Ra that no, that doesn't happen. It's a one person creates their God forms. That's the way that worked. And you'll find this in other papers as well. One paper will say this, but you've got to look at the pedigree of the papers, the provenance of it, where it came from, who ran it. Did everyone have a copy of this paper? The answer is probably no. Did they teach it to anyone else? There are stacks of papers that are given out that are written by somebody, maybe even to a small area. And one of the reasons for that is, look at Whare Ra. Whare Ra was made up of 5 demonstrators at its peak. They all wrote papers on behalf of the chief. Did the chief see every paper they got? Probably not. I just wrote it anyway and just gave it out to the novices. Does that mean that paper written, looked at some 50 years later or 100 years later, have more relevance than what you're actually showing? No, of course it doesn't. It means that one person in one area of Whare Ra at one point in time did this, and then you might see people coming in the same area we're not being taught that. So there's a lot of variables there, and you just simply can't go by documentation. Well, I'm an historian, a Master of Philosophy and History, so Tony's got a doctorate in philosophy and history as well. So we're taught all this, the checks and balances within it, what to look for. And we realise this, and so to try and hold the documentation up as the one particular point in time to say this is the way to do it because someone wrote it up is bloody ridiculous. You've got to look at your origins, you've got to look at the surroundings, it's a whole bunch of stuff. And 9 times out of 10 you won't get everything, you'll just get a snippet. If someone wrote it in their book, they think this, that's fine. So that's the way it is today, and you've got to be careful that you just don't go overboard and take. I would like people to take documentations of mine and say this is the way they did it in the GD, because I've extrapolated what I was taught from Whare Ra a great deal. And because one of the problems at Whare Ra, of course, they all never got all the papers, and the wardens had to help them out. So there was a divergence of opinion in certain areas. I saw that when the guys were working with the rituals with me, and they were saying, the second time I went through, the first one was a flow pattern to show how it worked, and the second time I went through, they stopped and questioned. I said they could ask questions. So they would go up there, and the other one would say, this means that, and so-and-so would say, no, this doesn't, it means something else, and someone else would come in, no, I was taught by Mrs. Falcon, who said it was that. So you had an argument virtually going on over every couple of minutes. This is the way the divergence works. You have to formulate your own opinion and stick with it. Then if people want to add more layers to it, you've got to look at things in layers. You just can't look at things as a single unit. If documentation comes in, you've got to look at the layered process. Where did it come from? Who wrote it? What's it in connection with? When was it given out? Who was the teacher? Who else had it? Did they do it in ritual? There's a pile of stuff you have to weed your way through to do that. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. Questions? We've gone on and on here.
Yeah, we've gone off topic again, but it's all good. It's good. It's good stuff. A lot of good teaching.
Well, I brought this in. I discussed this with Martin, talking about what his view was, because Martin, when I go toes up, Martin's going to be looking after things, or if he goes toes up before me, I don't know what we're going to do there. But so the idea is, you know about Martin, where he's coming from, where he trained under, who he trained under, how he trained, and our connection. And I just did this so you understand it, because if I go toes up, people are going to come in. I trained under Pat Zalewski and I got this, and it gets very confusing. This way, there's no confusion. I'm just laying it out so people know where we're coming from and what we're doing.
Thank you for that. One thing for sure is back in '95 when I first saw your Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn book, there was no way I could have known that 27 years later I'd be sitting here in your home talking about all of this, the succession, but not just that, all the value that you bring to the tradition. It's I'm not sure people realize to what extent we're blessed to have the oral tradition that comes through you and the experience and the training that you bring, and it's really, really, really good that you're putting it into book form, that you're putting it into a course, that you're passing it on, and like I said just a moment ago, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that everything you've passed on to me will get passed on for many generations.
Yeah, Tony Ford's done a lot of work too, mainly on the historical side of stuff, uncovering the papers, and who said what. So Tony's done. We've both done two things. I've done the more technique orientated thing, who does what and where and why, and Tony's come in more with the historical viewpoint of explaining it. We've crossed over a little bit with each other. So the two of us were only born about 3 months apart. I'm 3 months older than Tony. So we're both given the historical aspect of Whare Ra teachings and the practical aspect of Whare Ra teachings and the extrapolations of Whare Ra teachings. So we're both working as a unit there, and we have been for quite some time. And so we've brought that out. So it'll help us, of course, Tony, to pull back a little bit on some areas, and I've had my ups and downs as well, but generally okay. I was up there doing 40 push-ups this morning, elevated. So. But yeah, it's just the way it is. But
well, I guess we should wrap it up. But I will say this: thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for everything you are, and thank you for everything you continue to do for the tradition. And above all, thank you for your trust. And
thanks to everyone else who's on the forum and who works the Golden Dawn system and who reads this stuff, because I'm sure their contributions is just as valid as mine.
100%. All right, well, we're going to close this one up, and of course we'll see you all on the next one.